Former Eskom Executive Manager and former City Power Johannesburg Executive Vally Padayachee is calling for Eskom to be fixed now. In an article titled Carpe Diem, folks, Eskom is in a poverty of the soul crisis. Just fix it. He joins us to talk us through the degeneration of the power utility of the last 15 years. You'll remember that Eskom was once in history one of the most sought after power utilities, giving the world a run for its money. We speak now to Mr. Padayachee for more on this. Thank you very much for availing yourself, and a Happy New Year to you. Perhaps let's go back in time when you were working at Eskom and it was operating at its most optimum. What was the secret of success at the time? I mean, the world was looking at us in envy, essentially.
Good afternoon, Dudu, and very Happy New Year to you as well, and to the viewers. Blessed New Year. Yes, I think I go back to the 90s when I was at Eskom. I worked in Eskom generation at the operational levels and at the leadership levels. And at the time, Eskom was one of the top 5 utilities in the world. And actually, I think in 2001, we were the top utility in the world. We had actually won an award. And what contributed to that, and I made mention of that in my article, was obviously a top-performing culture, and it was what I call the soul of the company. I mean, companies normally have a culture, all companies, but top-performing companies who perform at the highest level have what I call a soul. And the soul of the company is the culture plus what I call an X factor that energizes the company, including the people, to produce those top quality results. And Eskom generation was performing at that level, at the highest level at that time. And what seems to be forgotten now is that we seem to be focusing a lot on the technical and the financial recovery. But what's been forgotten is the people aspect. And if the people are not performing at their peak, then all the financial and technical results and the poor performance becomes apparent. So, yeah, so what I'm saying in a nutshell, the people element, the psychological element of the company has deteriorated to such an extent that if we do not arrest that recovery, Eskom will collapse.
What led to the erosion of the soul, this culture that you speak of, this motivation of people to do what they need to do to keep the lights on?
Yeah, maybe just to indicate that Eskom and the Eskom generation business is a very complex machinery, and it requires people, very competent people, to perform at the highest levels to keep that machinery running. Now, if there are other extraneous factors that interfere, then people get despondent. And just to quote to you some of the factors, the rampant, well, let's not call it rampant, the significant corruption, sabotage, poor leadership. I mean, we've had about 12 CEOs, I think, in 13 years, and mismanagement, etc., etc. And the loss of attention to the people aspect has contributed to what I call the normal contributions that would have been made by those employees to perform at that highest level.
Given that Eskom is a state-owned enterprise, do we then put this down to the main stakeholder? You speak of a CEO for every year, essentially, saying there's been a new CEO each year for the past 12 years.
I would say it's a combination. Obviously, the shareholder, together with the board, appoints the CEO, and the type of CEO that gets appointed, obviously, you would put that to the board and to the shareholder combined. But I think the types of CEOs, I wouldn't say all of them, but I would say most of them in the last 12, 13 years did not perform at the level that was expected. And of course, you had the state capture and corruption that came in between. And I think even now, the last CEO, although I don't have anything personal against him, dropped the ball in certain aspects. And I think also in trying to maintain the high-level performance of the company, I think that's where he dropped the ball. And that's why I make the comment in my article that the soul of Eskom, especially in Eskom generation, is virtually destroyed.
You also cite in your article that whomever is going to be appointed CEO, as you just referenced now, is not just about the hard skills but the soft skills as well. You point out that besides some of the various technologies, the Eskom Sustainability Index and long-term plant indicators were also global firsts. Do we still have that at Eskom?
I don't believe that we have it in the same format that we had it when I was there. I think it's been diluted, it's had to be corrected, but those indicators are not there in the same format, except the long-term plant health indicators are there in a different format. But I think the important point, Dudu, is that the Eskom is now prevalent with a number of what I call organizational pathologies, right? And I mentioned a few of them, but they're all listed in my article. And I think that's going to come back and bite Eskom, if it's not already bitten Eskom. And if those organizational pathologies are not arrested and taken care of, it will also lead to the collapse of Eskom. And that's why I say that the new CEO that gets appointed has to be somebody that's also competent in having done a psychological turnaround in companies similar to Eskom globally. And if we do not have a CEO that's appointed that has that attribute, then we'll have a repeat of the previous 12 CEOs. In other words, they will focus on the technical, financial aspects, and yet the people aspect would be neglected, I believe, and that has to be given priority.
The organizational pathology you speak of is defined in your article as a broad concept that includes any internal aspect, characteristic, irregularity, inefficiency, or dysfunction of an organization that could threaten the survival of the organization. And then there's 12 points that speak to the organizational pathology. I think point 7 of surrendering to the herd effect, something that came to my mind when I was reading that was the whole renewable energy project, which has highly divided society, because then you have some people that saying that South Africa, well, is surrendering to the herd effect. We're not really fully ready for this. At least it hasn't been explained to a point where we can rally behind it. And then you have some sectors of society that say, well, we need to go renewable and we need to go now, citing the climate crisis. While we appreciate that, the continent and South Africa don't contribute nearly enough to global emissions. And so how should we understand that in the context of Eskom?
I'm glad you raised that point, Dudu, because it's a very sensitive aspect that's been discussed in the landscape in the last 6 months. I agree with the sentiments that you've expressed. I firmly believe, and let me get it out of the way, I'm a firm supporter also of renewables, but let me qualify that. I'm a firm supporter that we should be moving from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy, right? Not at the expense of flooding the grid with the renewables. South Africa is endowed with a significant supply of, let's call it cheap coal, right? So unlike other countries in the world, Western countries, who don't have that luxury, we have it. So I'm saying that, and especially in a crisis situation, I repeat, in a crisis situation, we must make use of all technologies, including renewables, which is non-dispatchable, being technical, and the dispatchable technologies.
What does that mean? Which
includes coal, nuclear, hydro, gas, for example, right? And you cannot, technically, you cannot solve this crisis only with renewables, because the sun does not shine 24 hours, the wind does not blow 24 hours, and as I say, it's non-dispatchable. So you need the dispatchable technologies. Now, having said that, and that's what the point I've always made in the media recently, that we need to keep the limping, albeit limping, Eskom coal-fired fleet performing at its highest level until this crisis situation is over and a bit longer. And why I'm saying that is that if we do not do that, then the grid will collapse, because although we need 6,000 megawatts now, if the coal-fired fleet gets even worse, and when I say worse, there's an energy availability factor that's been spoken about. And the crisis plan is based on a 70%, 75% energy availability factor, plus the 6,000 megawatts, right? But at the moment, we are performing, the last figure a week ago was around about 50% energy availability factor. That's a serious indictment on the performance of that coal-fired fleet. And I'm just worried, and we can see evidence of it now. We're load shedding even today.
Yeah.
We load shed yesterday. For us to load shed in this period, right, it's saying to us that we are sitting on a knife edge. Now, I'm worried that come next week or the week thereafter, when all industries are back on the grid, industrials, commercials, office blocks, and if we continue with this 50-odd% energy availability factor, we could get into stage 6, 7, or 8 load shedding, right? And that's why the point you made early on about having a mix of technologies. I'm a firm believer in having a balanced jet strategy. And the balanced jet strategy should be technology agnostic, meaning that we should take on board the renewables, solar, wind, but look at, for example, clean coal technologies, right? Because we have enough coal of it. They say it's expensive, but we have cheap coal. So let's do the business case, right? Let's find the gas. I think gas is also quite important. Hydro, pump storage. I mean, the case, and I'm actually looking at it myself, of you looking at low-ed pump storage schemes. And if we get that, I'm hoping that we could at least alleviate and mitigate this crisis situation.
Yeah.
But we are sitting on a knife edge at the moment.
Mr. Padayachee, before we let you go, then point 8, ignoring of minor signals. I desperately want to understand this. When you were working at Eskom and we're talking of coal, we always hear as a result of wet coal or power generating units failing, etc. Where's the coal stored? Why is it exposed to rain, where we now saying we can't give you electricity because there's wet coal?
Well, that needs some time to unpack, but very quickly, we normally have, I think in my days we had about 20, 21 to about 30 days of stock days. So the coal that gets delivered does not get delivered directly from the truck onto the furnace or boiler. It gets stored in bunkers and so on. And then, depending on the volume of coal that gets delivered, and the stockyard could grow, right? And you would end up with some coal outside the, let's call it the covers.
Okay.
And then if you have intense rain, which we've been having, so then you would get ingress of water into it. Plus, also, you would get some trucks that also are delivering coal that's wet, besides bringing rocks and rubble and all of that. So that's a very quick answer to that question.
Okay, thank you for your indulgence. And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, Mr. Vally Padayachee, a former executive at Eskom.